Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 27 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today, as always, by my ever-faithful and dependable colleague, lead cloud engineer, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
You're only saying that because I was off sick last week and
I'm laying it
back to the desk.
I'm laying it on thick just to make sure you don't go off sick again.
Keep paying for private healthcare. That seems to help.
Yeah, well, you didn't miss an episode of the podcast, which is great.
No, exactly. We're fine.
I admire your commitment. So it's all good.
4 days of antibiotics, and I'm getting there now. But no, I'm all right. I'm all right.
Technically, you shouldn't say that because you make us sound like a slave labor type employer where you've come back to work when you are sick. You were given the option to remain off, but I know how much you love doing the podcast, so you had to come back for that. And of course, you knew that we were having our special guest today, Jenn Bergstrom, fellow AWS community builder. Jenn, how are you doing today, Jenn?
I'm doing fantastic. It's a beautiful summer, hot day here in Denver, Colorado.
Nice. It's a beautiful, wet, rainy summer's day here in the UK, which is kind of par for the course, really. But we don't live here for the weather. We live here because we were born here, I think is the main reason to live here. But So, Jenn, tell us a little bit about yourself. You mentioned where you come from, but what do you do for a living? What do you do for the AWS community?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the Cloud and Data Solutions lead for Parsons, my company. And Parsons is a 18,000 person strong company that has two halves to it. And I sit on the federal side, so I do a lot of government contracting and drive the cloud strategy for that piece of the company. As far as what I do for the community, I'm an AWS community builder, as you mentioned. I'm actually coordinating our community hike for reInvent this year, which I'm pretty excited about. And I also am an AWS ambassador for Parsons and AWS, which is a pretty fun thing to do. It gives me a chance to interact with great community people all around the world.
Awesome. Well, John and I are signed up for the Community Builder Hike at reInvent this year. It will be our first time, so go easy on us. I signed up for the long route, so I hope I'm not going to regret that. But I'll get plenty of training in ahead of time. Any tips for the hike? Is it your first time, or I assume as the organizer, you've done it before?
Yeah, absolutely. I started with the very first one that we did. This will be our third annual.
Nice.
Main tip is bring lots of water and really good hiking shoes. But cool. you should be all right if you're doing a little bit of training, doing a little bit of walking beforehand. It's not a super intense, challenging hike.
You never lost anyone?
We have not lost anyone yet.
Yet. Okay.
Yeah. It's always the first time.
Let's try not to be the statistic. We are hoping to come back from Vegas and continue recording more episodes of the podcast. So thanks for that intro.
Safe and sound too.
Nice. Yeah, nice. Well, do we have to sign a waiver though to say that we might not come back? There's always a waiver.
It was on the form.
Was it?
It said at your own risk.
Yeah. I've already signed the waiver.
By saying you wanted to do the hike, I think you've signed the waiver by default.
Cool. Okay. Well, we're not here to talk about hiking, as fun as it sounds. As regular listeners to the podcast will know, every Friday I curate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John and I, together with our guests, pick a subset of the articles from the newsletter that we would like to talk to you about on the podcast. So we have such a set of articles for this week. And the first two, in fact, are about Amazon ECS. So we've spoken about containers on the podcast before, but we've got some exciting new features for ECS, which have been announced in the last week. And the first of those is that Amazon ECS now enforces software version consistency for containerized applications. So I must confess, John, I read this a few times, didn't really get it. So I'm really looking forward to your explanation of this one.
You don't get it because you're a salesman. That's why.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't need to get it because I have people like you who get it. So
I've been burned by this. So this was very interesting to me. I've been burned by what this solves. Quick intro. So ECS containers, great, lovely. When you build a container, you run through a series of steps, and that generates at the end of it an image and a 256 SHA. Right. So you've got this unique key that says it looks like this. You rebuild that container using that set of steps 1,000,000 times, you get the same jar. Yeah, that's just how that works. You change it slightly, you get a different one. Cool. Those are immutable, cannot be changed, will always be the same for that image. The other thing that you do when you're building them is you put tags on them to say this is version 1, version 2, version 7, that kind of thing. And a nice convenience tag is latest. So you just sort of go, I'll have the latest one, please. Tags aren't immutable. They are mutable. They can be changed. And what this means is if you're using the latest tag in any of your deployment processes and the value of the image underneath that tag changes, you can accidentally deploy things. That's a real pain. Now, a lot of the time that's intentional because you've gone, oh, my latest is different and I want to pull the new one, so we'll pull the new one and it all rolls out and everything works. But it's not always intentional, and it can burn you. It can burn you really badly because all of a sudden you've pushed out something that was not actually ready and shouldn't have been put through and all the rest of it. This solves for that because it's not making tags immutable as such, but it's resolving the tags to the digest. And historically, the way you've done that is I've done it and it's really dirty, but you've tagged the digest against the image. So there you go. That's the one that you're after. But this is good. This solves for this problem. And it means that even if you're using, as it says in the announcement, a latest tag and your service scales out and you haven't redeployed, it's going to grab the correct one still. So great. Absolutely love this.
Thoughts on this, Jenn? Is this a problem that you've experienced yourself?
It is a problem that I've experienced. I also was looking at it from a slightly different reason why it's valuable from what John just said. I agree with everything he said. But the other thing with it is sometimes if you have a hacker that gets into your system, they might try to change your image and rebuild it after injecting some bad code into it. And by tying your deployment to the specific SHA of your image that you've built with this addition, you're preventing that type of bad hacking action from occurring in your environment. Because now if that SHA changes, then it's not going to get picked up and rolled in, even if you aren't using latest as your tag, which, best practice, you generally try not to do that if you can avoid it. But even if you're not using the latest tag, if you're using a specific version number, before hackers could go in and make that change and you'd have a different SHA, but you wouldn't necessarily realize it and it would deploy according to that version number. Now that SHA will change if they make a modification and you'll get your original version of it rather than their modified version when you have a scaling event occur. So I think it's a really good thing. My first thought, honestly, when I read this article was, why did it take them so long to do this? I think it's tremendously valuable and overdue to have been put
I'm not
in.
aware of any other container repository services that do this, though.
True.
So this is actually, when we complain about why did this take so long, typically I'm complaining about why did this take AWS so long. And in this case, I think they're the first ones to do it, which is a bit weird.
Yeah, that is a fair point. And, I guess I hold AWS to a high standard for their security capabilities and for their consideration of cyber vulnerabilities. And to me, once I read about this, it was kind of we should have been doing that for a long time. So it's a great idea that when I read it, I wanted to have had it a year ago or 2 years ago. So, me holding AWS to the high standard that I do, wondered why they hadn't done it before. But you're right that it isn't something that's commonly done by any container repository right now. So it is kind of a game changer and a push ahead of the others.
AWS leading the way. That's what we like to see. So just at the end of the article, that mentions that it's automatically enforced. So what do users need to do to take advantage of this? Nothing. Nothing.
Yep.
Just correct tagging.
Which is hard for everybody, but there we go.
It is. There's always a lot of discussion about how much effort it's worth putting into using not latest as your tag.
It's the laziest thing in the world. And yes, I've done it because obviously everyone's done it.
Oh, absolutely.
We'll fix that later. We'll just get it working like that now and we'll fix it later. And
it's a new build. We're deploying every 10 minutes. Let's just keep going. Oh.
Wait. Well, and the other benefit of this change is the user consistency aspect of it too. Right now, if you have a deployment that scales and you have pushed a new version out, you're going to present the same version to every customer. So they're not going to have it switch underneath them and all of a sudden see something different.
Nice. So, sticking with the theme of containers and ECS, another feature that was announced last week was that Amazon ECS now provides enhanced stop task error messages for easier troubleshooting. So, Jenn, I'll come to you first on this one. Again, is this what are your thoughts on this one?
So this one is another one where it's, why did it take so long? No, this is a really good change. One of the biggest challenges that my teams have always had with debugging containerized applications is figuring out what went wrong when something goes wrong. So enhancing these error messages, giving some better clarity in what really is going on. My guys are thrilled about this. My teams are ecstatic that this is in there now, and they're going to be making heavy use of it as they're debugging their systems.
John, thoughts on this?
Yeah, no notes. So I mean, deploying containers generally, when you got it working kind of on your local machine, or if you're a platform person and you're not running it on your local machine, and then the first place you try and run it is remotely, and it just goes, oh, it didn't work. That's maddeningly annoying. That's just mind-numbingly annoying. And what I've historically resorted to doing is dive into the container as it's booting and going, here's what's going on. And that's horrible. That's awful to have to do. I mean, the correct thing is, make sure that you've got your logging set up and it's exfiltrating the logs and all the rest of it. But it doesn't always show you what's going on. It could be random permission errors. It could be odd bits of networking because you've used endpoints and they're not configured properly and all that kind of thing. So generally, more verbose error messages are always going to get a thumbs up.
Well, and John brought up a good point with that too, that a lot of the testing you do is localized testing. These error messages are going to be especially useful once you start doing that remote deployment and pushing it out into your AWS environment. And there are so many potential areas where that can go wrong that without good error messages from AWS or from the deployment itself, you're oftentimes fishing in the dark, trying to figure out what the problem is. So this will help clear that up, shed a little light on what's going on.
Nice. The more light, the better. And this
Depends
article
on the fish.
states but this article does state that it is available automatically in all AWS regions. So again, ECS users do not need to do anything to take advantage of this new feature. We like. So let's move on to our third article for this week. And this one is about the announcement of the open source release of the Secrets Manager agent for AWS Secrets Manager. Now, AWS has taken a lot of criticism in the past for taking hold of open source projects and monetizing them and not giving a lot back to the open source community. But I think the tables have turned on that in recent years, and a lot more of the software that AWS has developed has been released back into the community as open source software. So I guess this is an example of that. But John, tell us a little bit about the AWS Secrets Manager agent and what people could use this for.
Yeah, so when this came out 18 months ago, I was very excited about this because best practice is you keep secrets in Secrets Manager. It's one of the better named services. It's kind of what it says on the tin. Great. Historically, that was really awkward, particularly if you're in something like a Lambda or a containerized environment where injecting things through environment variables, you don't really want to do it. Or particularly if you've got things like database credentials and they're rotated outside, you don't want to have to redeploy everything just to pick the new credentials up. Okay. So what you do, put it in Secrets Manager, and then you'd query it using the API. This is, excuse me, hang on. See, I told you I'm ill.
You missed the mute button as well for effect. Just had to prove it, didn't you? You had to prove it.
Exactly.
We believed you, John. Don't worry.
I'm going to keep going on about it too. So historically, what you'd have done is you'd have used the API or the SDK realistically to interact with it. So you'd have written into your Lambda function a whole bunch of additional code for interfacing with Secrets Manager, pulling things out of Secrets Manager, interpolating the results, and all the rest of it. With the agent, you didn't need to do that anymore. There was an HTTP agent running in the execution environment, and you could just issue native web requests to it. Brilliant. Because you didn't have to worry about loads of additional things. It just worked. I think you still had to sort the permissions out, but there was this whole wedge of boilerplate code that you didn't need to write anymore. And that was amazing. So that's what that is. And making that open source more generally, great.
Thoughts on this one, Jenn?
So I will admit I don't have a ton of thoughts on this one, just because I don't get to work in Lambda as often as I would like. So I'm not really using, all of the goodness that John just talked about all that often. However, I am a fan of open source, and I like seeing Amazon pushing stuff out there that so that people can understand more completely what's going on with the agent code, and so that they can make modifications and extend if they need to. It'll be interesting to see what people do with this. I admit I follow the repository now, and I'm going to be seeing how many forks and clones there are made of it, as it goes through, just because I want to see how much uptake it gets and how excited people really are out there about it.
Well, John said he was really excited. So if John's really excited, I'm sure there are other people in the community who are also really excited.
I don't know. I'm really boring.
I didn't say you were exciting. I said you're excited.
Exited.
Big difference. Big difference. What was the there was something else last week as well, I'm sure, that was open source. Do you recall?
No, I don't remember.
But,
I don't remember.
Yeah.
All I remember from last week is Catalan taps.
Yeah, well, that was definitely a big digression off topic. So let's try and stay on topic this week. And I know this is another one that you're pretty excited about, John. So the next article, back on AI, of course. We've managed to get halfway through this episode before mentioning AI, but we're back on the subject of AI. This is an article from the AWS machine learning blog about using agents for Amazon Bedrock to interactively generate infrastructure as code. So even I found this pretty cool, because it looks to me like what it's doing is you can just upload a solutions architecture diagram, and by the magic of AI, infrastructure as code would be spat out the other end. I'm sure it's not quite as straightforward as that, as these things never are. But John, tell us a little bit about this.
I mean, that's the high level version of it. I was reading it, skimming through it, and going, is Carl going to fire me? Is he going to think he's going to be able to do my job for me? And the answer is, fortunately, no. But it looks like an incredibly powerful tool, and it's an interesting way of just using AI generally for something that actually has value and isn't just like cat gifs. So great, or images of people not sitting on things, but they look like they're sitting down. Like, okay. But no, I like this. I like this a hell of a lot. You're not far off in your assessment, Carl, because again, you put your infrastructure diagram together, and of course your infrastructure diagram will be read by it natively because you always use the correct icon set.
I wonder if it factors in legacy icons. That's a real bugbear of mine, people using legacy icons from the legacy icon toolkit in current architecture diagrams. I wonder if the code's been written to take that into account.
I would be surprised if the model wasn't trained at least some on the legacy icons. You would hope.
Let's hope so, because they're still out there in the wild. I see them on a regular basis, sometimes even in blog posts shared by AWS.
But yeah, assuming that it understands your icon set, you're not far off. It's upload it, have a conversation with the AI, which is the weirdest thing in the world to say out loud, but there you go. And then it eventually spits out infrastructure code, which you can then go ahead and deploy. Now, it's interesting. I think it's working primarily as, it'll do Terraform, it'll do CloudFormation. Great, fine. It's still grunt worky because you've still had to come up with the diagram. So you still kind of need to know what you're doing there. And it asks you a bunch of questions. I mean, for example, they can talk about CIDR ranges and security groups and all this kind of thing. So you do need to know what you're doing with the system. But it feels like it's taking the grunt work that you'd give to like a junior platform engineer. So look, make this. Okay, cool. I've made that. And rather annoyingly, that's a lot of what I do because I can do it faster. I can do it quite quickly because I've done it quite a lot. So, okay. How much more useful this is to an experienced engineer that's got an IDE set up properly with the relevant plugins and it's just doing all the autocompletes and things for you, I'm not sure. It's a very, very interesting use case. But what I'd really like to see is one that does it the other way round. Now, I know that exists kind of elsewhere, but I've never seen it that I really liked. So I'd like to see it the other way around. But yeah.
What do you mean? Generates diagrams from infrastructure as code?
Yes, I'd love to see that.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, you can do it because you upload your CloudFormation template, you get the designer, but that looks ugly as hell. I'd like something that looks pretty and doesn't, and you've got 6 subnets here. You don't need to show me all 6. Just say, look, there are 6. We've omitted them for brevity because you're actually only using 2 of them. Brilliant, but they can't do that.
Yeah,
Thoughts
that
on
type
this,
of
Jenn?
context would be nice. So I like this one. One of the things that I appreciated about this one as I was reading through the article was the double checks that it has in place. It's working with the engineer to create the infrastructure as code rather than doing it just for you. So John talked about the question and answer bit that it does at the beginning, and that's, in my mind, that's like requirements derivation, making sure it really understands what you were trying to do with your architecture document. And then it creates its initial attempt at your infrastructure as code in either Terraform or CloudFormation, which I also appreciated that it does both. And then it gives it to you to review before it does anything else with it. And, that to me is really important because there's additional considerations oftentimes in highly regulated environments like the federal ones that I work in that aren't necessarily captured in the diagram, but that you need to be considered and have part of the complete design and the actual infrastructure as code that you write, and having it presented to you beforehand so you can make edits to it and give it feedback and change it up a little bit helps protect those types of special needs in the design while still being a force accelerator. I actually think this one is going to be really useful for teams of, mixed, very experienced engineers and less experienced engineers coming in, because you can use it as almost a training mechanism for your less experienced engineers, where you work with them to help create the architecture diagram and then let this generate the code for them and then have them assess it as part of their learning process. And I think it'll accelerate the learning process for those individuals on those teams too.
I guess what would be interesting is to take an existing solution that you've already written some code for and run that through it and see how different it is.
Well, this is the point around, and maybe not specifically regulated environments, but my HLDs are very high level because, like I say, I'm not going to specify every single subnet because you present that to a client and they're going to go, I don't care, this diagram's too messy. It doesn't make sense to me. I want to see where my servers are and what's talking to what. I don't care about the networking. So I do wonder how it would cope if you gave it an incomplete diagram that just says, it's in a VPC. Okay. I've not told you anything about subnets, but you need a VPC. Is it going to know enough to then ask me, I need to talk to you about subnets as well? How many, public, private, that kind of thing. And then the other element as well, which kind of comes out here in the generated Terraform, is there's certain best practices now, particularly for VPCs, and I'm aware of this because I've been doing it recently, that when you create them through the console, which don't do it, but when you create them through the console, the nice kind of wizard says, do you want to install these other things as well? And you get the S3 endpoint and the Dynamo endpoint, and you save some money doing that. And that's not on there. And I would kind of expect it to have done that. So I'm not, it's good, it's powerful, it's interesting, but it's another thing with AI. It's not there yet, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is a common problem with the AI-enabled tools right now. Most of them are not fully baked.
I mean, this is a lot more baked than the one that gave a car away for $1. So
I don't know. I kind of like that one. It's unfortunate I'm not the one who got the car for $1, but.
Well, I wonder how far you can go with it, because you mentioned, John, you kind of need to know what you're doing to put the diagram together in the first place. But do you really? Because now we have things like Amazon Q, where you can just ask in the console to say, design me a solution for, I don't know, a hosted LAMP stack on AWS. And, in theory, it should be able to spit you out at least a bill of materials, if not a diagram, which could then be ingested into this. So it's...
yeah, maybe. I don't think you're going to get away from having architects around. And I mean, platform people have historically been part-time architects anyway, because a technical architect will sort of say, I want it to look like this. That's physically impossible. We can't do that. But much like architects for houses have no concept of gravity, and a structural engineer tells them, you can't build that, it won't work. I don't think you're going to get away from having at least some sort of architecture input in this, outside of, as you say, like, give me a lamp stack, because that's very well defined and very simple. If you start throwing anything even slightly out of the box at it, like, I want to use private link because my database is somewhere else, or I want to use direct connect because I've got a on-prem bit of setup or whatever, I think it's going to start to fall over.
Yeah. So do you think its main kind of use case is going to be more around components of solutions, which are still going to need to be manually strung together by an architect or a platform team? Could it accelerate some of that, but not be the entire solution?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've heard various, what do they call them now? Dev, whatever they are. I want to call them evangelists, but they're not.
Developer advocates. Yeah.
Mateus is going to shoot me for that one. He really is. I've heard it described by dev advocates as it's not replacing anybody. It's an accelerator for low value work that you just have to do. And the one example that I have seen that was quite good was creating test data. Yeah, that's low value, but you have to do it. Is this low value? Yeah, it's higher value, but it's still not. It's still just a lot of time for getting what's in your head or on the piece of paper into reality. So I think it's just an accelerator at this stage.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. It's not something, much like self-driving in vehicles, right? It's not something that's ready for prime time, ready for unsupervised work. It's something that will make people's lives a little bit easier and probably speed some of the grunt work up so that you don't have to worry about it quite as much. Or to use a really old AWS statement, it's doing the heavy lifting for you, right? At least some of it. But it's not something you do all by yourself, set free to create your whole system yet by itself.
Yeah. Still requires some human oversight, human in the loop, as they say.
Absolutely.
But the self-driving thing is interesting. There are a couple of cities now live with the self-driving cabs in the US, aren't there? I forget what it's called. What was the Google self-driving project? They've renamed it. And because a former colleague of mine I saw on his Facebook recently, he actually had a video of himself in a self-driving cab. I forget which of the two cities. It's literally, I think it's Phoenix, Arizona, and maybe San Francisco that actually has a kind of a, initial rollout of the self-driving cabs. It looked very weird. He's just sitting in the back of a cab with no driver, driving in traffic, steering wheel moving, and yeah.
So I'm a Tesla driver, and I have the full self-drive in my car, and I use it regularly, but it's used with supervision. I would never be comfortable, at least not yet, sitting in the back seat of the car and letting it drive itself without somebody up there to correct it when it makes bad choices. But
are you completely hands off with that? So hands off, but ready to grab the wheel if need be, or?
Basically, I mean, you're required to give it some tactile feedback periodically so that it knows that you're still alive and paying.
Still awake.
So you have to jiggle the wheel basically every once in a while. But
does it jiggle the seat if you fail to jiggle the wheel to kind of wake you up again?
It does, and it actually flashes up alarms on the console and yells at you if you do it too much. And if you do it too much, it kicks you out of self-drive, and it'll actually pull over and stop the car and make you take over, which is nice. Kind of fun. That happened to me once, and it wasn't because I wasn't paying attention. It's because I wasn't jiggling the wheel aggressively enough when it asked for feedback.
Well, you don't want to jiggle it too aggressively because then you're going to be in the wrong lane. So
that's always my fear. I jiggled it too aggressively once.
No, I'm here.
Yeah, exactly. I jiggled it too hard once and veered into the lane next to me and kicked it out of auto drive myself. And it was like, I don't want to do that anymore.
That does not sound ideal. That does not sound ideal.
Thankfully, the road was empty when I did that, so it was okay. But
anyway, we digress. So let's get back on track and talk about our final article this week, which ironically is about security. So I guess we were talking about a bit of personal security there in the self-driving car. But this article is from the AWS Security blog about the top 4 ways to improve your Security Hub score. And I had a quick scan through this, and it appears to me that the best way to improve your security hub score is to just turn off all the checks, which doesn't seem, doesn't seem like a great answer. I'm sure probably I've just skimmed it, and that's not actually what the article is saying. But thoughts on this one, Jenn?
Yeah, so, security scanning and building a secure system and building that secure by default culture into your organization is super important. A lot of the suggestions were, frankly, kind of along the lines of, hey, you can turn off that check, or you can put an adjudication in there rather than fixing it, or, kind of the standard way of dealing with the security things. So I didn't feel like there was a lot of new knowledge in the article, frankly. It was mostly kind of things that people already do. I did appreciate that there was a little bit of talk in ways that you can work with the security tools that AWS provides to help tailor it so that it's really appropriate for your deployments and for your system. That piece of it was interesting to me. And the reality is everybody needs to care a lot more about security than we historically have. So seeing an article like this that raises awareness about security and gets people thinking about it, if nothing else, it's good from that standpoint as well.
Anything to add, John?
The most secure thing you can do is turn off all your servers. Can't hack them if they're not on.
That's true. You can't hack a brick.
Yeah. Yeah, we did talk about this. We were having an internal security meeting. We were discussing whether things like a disastrous flood in the data center ought to be in our information security management system. And I said exactly the same thing. Nobody can hack our servers if they're underwater. So I'm not sure we need to worry about that. Perhaps we need to worry about it from a business continuity perspective, but not directly from a data security perspective.
That is true, unless you have a hardened device that's rated for, 5 meters of immersion or something like that, and then you probably do still have to worry about it.
Yep.
Well, Microsoft put a load of servers under the sea in Scotland a few years ago. They weren't they were underwater, but they were like sealed units. So I don't think that counts.
Yeah, I just wondered what happened when there was a hard drive failure in that data center, because I can't imagine the on-call engineers being able to actually scuba dive down and let themselves into the data center to swap the disks over. I guess they just had to build in enough resilience to just leave the failed disks in the machines.
They just stayed dead, but the data that they got was fascinating. It was something like 1/8 the failure rate compared to a normal data center. So even though it was incredibly, you had to build the fact in and all the rest of it, it failed so little, they came out ahead.
Nice. Has it caught on, though? I'm not sure it's caught on.
No, they kind of abandoned the test earlier in the year. I think China's testing with it now. It's very interesting, but it's one of those... There's only a few places you could really do it, because I probably wouldn't do it, anywhere really touristy. So off the coast of Stornoway, perfect. And they did it in Scotland because they had lots of, extra renewable energy that they could spend. So that's great as well. So there's only a few places you could do it. I don't know how well it'll catch on, but it's one of those things that as the need for compute generally increases, we're going to have to do weird things like that.
Well, let's hope it doesn't catch on too much, because we may literally boil the ocean with it, and we don't want that to happen. So anyway, we have digressed off the topic of security, but on that note, we have also reached the end of our time for season 3, episode 27 of Logicast. So John, thanks for showing up. It's much appreciated. And Jenn, thank you for joining us as our guest. It's been fantastic to meet you and to hear your insights on last week's AWS news. If you've enjoyed the podcast, tell your friends. We are available to download from wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to see the funny faces we pull while we're talking to you, we're also available to stream on YouTube. So thank you very much for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of Logicast for you.